Hello, my name is Annie Kyle. I lived in Fayetteville during the time of the Civil War and experienced firsthand the atrocities of war as General Sherman marched through our town. I am the daughter of James Kyle and wife of Jesse Kyle, who was my cousin. My father built Jesse and me a beautiful house to live in, known as the Kyle House, that still stands today on Green Street. It took 8 years to build that house, but it was worth the wait. After the frightful experience of the Great Fire of 1831, my father wanted to ensure that our house would never burn, so it was constructed with thick walls filled with sand. I told Jesse that I loved the house and I never wanted to leave it, and I never did. That is, until I died and I moved here to Cross Creek Cemetery. I'm so glad to see friendly faces passing through Fayetteville because Sherman and his troops were not exactly friendly to us. The reality of war has really been felt in this town. We all notice the wounded soldiers, absent husbands, and newly widowed women. While my own Jesse was wounded at the Battle of the Wilderness and was captured, it seemed like an eternity before I got word from him. You can imagine my terrible anxiety. Nothing could have prepared me for these difficult times. It is impossible to tell what we endured, and it never will be known until we stand before the judgment seat of God. General Sherman and his bluecoats swept down on this town, destroying our handsome arsenal. At night, we could see the fires in every direction, as many of the buildings in the county were burned. I can compare it to nothing but what I imagine Hades would be were its awful doors thrown open. Fayetteville suffered more than other towns, for we had 5 cotton factories here that Sherman burned to the ground, leaving hundreds of people without work or means of feeding themselves and families. This unemployment only added to our suffering. We have been robbed of nearly all we had, and there is nothing left to offer others in the way of help. Sherman's army descended upon us like a swarm of bees, ransacking our homes and stealing our silver, jewelry, and most of our food. Oh, we tried to hide it, but if those soldiers thought you were hiding something, they might even hang you, all to get a confession about where your valuables were hidden. What those soldiers could not take, they destroyed. Furniture, china, everything that was dear to the heart. Even old family portraits were chopped up with axes, and parlor carpets were cut up for saddle blankets. In addition, large family Bibles were used as saddles, and the horses that they could not take were led to Cool Spring Street to be shot and burned. With all the destruction going on around us, I am so thankful that my own home still stands. I learned that what was stolen from my home was carried to Wilmington and put on a boat bound for New York. Thankfully, the boat burned before it reached the New York harbor, so our beautiful furniture and household treasures never reached their destination. Sherman's army is gone now, but his presence stays with us in the form of disease and serious war injuries, which are still claiming lives. I was lonely during the war. Like other ladies who had watched their sons, husbands, and brothers march off to war, we sought to help the cause in any way we could. For many of us, volunteering at the hospital was one of our only solaces. I told myself as I nursed wounded soldiers that perhaps someone somewhere was nursing and caring for my beloved Jesse. We worked with willing hands and light hearts, knowing that General Lee and General Jackson were our leaders and that surely victory awaited us. In the year 1862, our hearts were continually cheered with good news from the Army, but in 1863 our hopes of victory began to turn as we witnessed large numbers of soldiers being brought into the hospitals with mortal wounds and suffering beyond words. I shall never forget the doctor's look of amazement when I applied for the position of assistant matron to the hospital. I told him that I didn't want any pay, but I must have constant occupation or I will lose my mind. I went every morning at 9 a.m. and stayed until 1, and always went back late in the afternoon to see that the wants of the patients were attended to during the night. I always dressed all the wounds each morning and soon found that my grief and sorrow were forgotten in administering to the needs of the sick. Such patience and fortitude of those brave soldiers has no parallel in history. Not one murmur did I ever hear escape their lips. My prayer book was my constant companion. I carried it in my pocket, and many a poor soldier have I soothed and comforted with holy prayers. One morning I had a message to come to the hospital. When I arrived, I was told that 5 Confederate soldiers had died and already had been buried, wrapped only in their hospital blankets. I was there in time to close the eyes of the 6th soldier. Soon after that, the mayor of Fayetteville surrendered our town, and federal officers insisted on burying all of the dead in one mass grave on the other side of Cross Creek. I could not allow this. It was my wish that our Confederate soldiers have a decent burial. So a few days after Sherman left town, I appealed to Mayor McLean to donate land in this cemetery as a burial site for our soldiers. Then I set about raising money from a few of my gentleman friends, enough to buy a coffin for each soldier and enough to have a grave dug for each one. Some of our boys had already been buried improperly, so I had their bodies brought up out of the earth. Then one afternoon at sunset, Dr. Husk, rector of St. John's Episcopal Church, read, "I am the resurrection and the life," and 30 coffins were lowered into the ground altogether in one place, a decent, dignified, and proper burial for our boys. That was what our soldiers deserved, and I felt it was the least I could do for them.